Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We've got an amazing team that's going to talk about OT security. It builds on a previous discussion that we had, so I want to thank the presenters for volunteering to take part in this. Just give me a moment. I just want to remove Read AI from the meeting. Okay. Now that I've done that, I'm settled. Welcome to Civil Coffee Clutch this morning. I hope that it will be a learning curve. It was certainly a learning curve for all of us that are presenting today. This is also the first time that we change our format from a pure presentation to a panel discussion. And thank you for the participants. It was because of your inputs that we decided to make this change. So a little bit about the network. Civil Coffee Clutch is a learning network, and I'm hosting it on the infrastructure of the Western Cape Provincial Government, Department of Local Government, where I am a consultant to local government on governance and strategy, IT governance and strategy. The purpose of the network is for us to learn from each other and to be able to implement what we learn in our differentiated environments. Our mission is to provide local government with information, and remember, those who attend the meetings are not just local government. We've got consultants to local government. It's not just IT people. It's consultants to local government. It is security experts, technology experts, information systems experts. We have internal audit practitioners, external audit practitioners. We've got risk managers attending, and then consultants to local government. So the mission is to lead local government from turmoil to strategy to incremental development and eventually reach the point of service excellence, and smart cities got a role to play in this. What we will be presenting is about us as people. It's not about technology or strategy or anything like that. It's about our development, and while we are developing and building and plowing back into local government, we strengthen local government in this journey towards service excellence. My slide that I will always have in here is we can create the future by imagining it. Once we've defined what we imagine and we keep on working with a memory of of what that looks like and what that feel like, we will be able to eventually move local government into that perfect picture that we have of the future. But if we keep on staring at circumstances, we will never be able to imagine the future, because the future will feel impossible. And what we are achieving is not impossible. The circumstances that we see around us is like the Matrix. Go and watch the 3 movies of the Matrix. It's just a Matrix. We can influence it. Quickly, my contact details and our speakers for today. I'm not going to introduce each speaker. I'm just going to mention their names. It's up to them to introduce themselves. So it's Mr. Willem van Zyl. He's at Cape Agulhas Municipality. Mr. Gavin Gresser, he's at Bito Municipality. Mr. Aaron Hendrikse, he's at 2TS. And Mr. Pieter Vierbergen, also 2TS. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm leading in today into this discussion, and this is the only slide that I've got. as I said in one of my opening statements, we are here to improve lives. We are here about the people. And when you look at operational technology security, whether you look at IoT security, whether you look at cybersecurity or application system security, there are a couple of things that we set out to protect. We protect, first of all, people. And people includes citizens and includes our own personnel. The second thing that we protect is service delivery, the infrastructure and the functionality of the infrastructure to be able to deliver the service and also the comprehensiveness thereof. The third thing that we protect is safety and security. To be aware what is happening, where it's happening, to position us to respond appropriately and quickly. And the last issue that we protect, there are two of them, is the financial sustainability of local government. If we look at ransomware, it influences financial sustainability. In big environments, the issue is never pay, but in big environments, those costs can be absorbed. In small municipalities, those costs cannot be absorbed. So what protection do we put in place to also protect financial sustainability? And the last issue that we protect is environmental sustainability. And that is the municipal ecosystem and the natural ecosystem that we are working with. When we move into, as we are moving into the era of smart city and smart technology that enables that smart city, we need to keep in mind that we've got infrastructure, we've got systems, and I'm not talking about IT systems, we've got operational systems. We've got infrastructure. Those infrastructures got electronic probes on it, which is our operational technology. On top of that, there is a layer of application system that collects the data, interprets the data, make automatic decisions. These things live in silos. We've got electricity, we've got water, we've got wastewater, we've got environmental management, and the wider aspects of access management into our buildings and so on. So when we bring them together, when we look at them at one, we want to achieve a smart city, but we need to understand that the underlying technology is fragmented and it needs to communicate in order to give us a view of the smart city. So we set out to build a electronic twin of what's happening in our municipalities, and that electronic twin needs to be aware of what happens on the ground, what happens day to day, give us the right information and help us to respond to it. Now, when the security of this broader digital ecosystem is compromised by somebody clicking on an email or somebody accessing OT device or IoT device like a camera within a water tank, and gaining access to the network, being able to escalate their rights into our network infrastructure, then the whole ecosystem is compromised. Now, I'm not professing a foolproof security system here. What I am professing is that through a systematic and incremental protection implementation, protection monitoring, and working towards the layered security infrastructure, we can secure with also the help of course, the industry. We can secure our environments. And the last thing I want to say about that is we need to be able to gain the intelligence of what's happening around us, what's happening internally, what's happening around us, what's happening nationally, what's happening internationally on a global scale, to position ourselves to be proactive and also to position ourselves to be effectively reactive, like can we recover if there is a incident? If somebody hacks in terms of water, how do we recover that water and make it available quickly? And there are various aspects in this. What we are working towards is rendering a trustable service to the citizenry that is absolutely founded on a proper accountability. And with that combination, we improve the investability of what's happening in our environments. We want to draw investment. We want to draw more people into our environments, and the infrastructure and the security of the infrastructure has to be in place for us to get there. So thank you very much for listening to me and hearing me out. I'm going to hand over to Willem for his presentation.
Thank you, David, for the opportunity of being here today. Good day, everyone. My name is Willem van Zyl. I'm the IT manager here at Cape Agulhas Municipality. We are focusing on, used to focus only on IT, but we've been moving into the OT space for some time. And obviously that means working with the infrastructure departments a lot on occasions and on finding solutions. Let me just start my presentation for you. Okay. So today I would like to talk. I'm not actually going too much into the OT space today. I actually want to more tell you about our journey that we took here in Cape Agulhas Municipality. So back in 2019, we started with a process of looking at solutions for using sensory equipment to get to more information and to more data that we can use to make business decisions. So that over time has escalated into numerous projects. But for today, I'm only going to focus on one of two of these, which is basically considering our water infrastructure, where we had the issue where we had water balance issues, reporting that through the financial statements, but also how to monitor a water infrastructure and digitize our water infrastructure, because over time we've had a legacy SCADA and telemetry system which was not supported anymore and wasn't used anymore. It was not functional as the operational people on the ground would have liked. So we moved towards digitizing that with sensory equipment and developing tools and monitoring equipment so that we can see exactly what's going on in our network. I think the important thing is to remember that there's always a risk related to these type of implementations. I think David has quite clearly stipulated set out how these various aspects or these various levels has different risks to each level of this implementation, and this is the kind of thing you need to consider. So from our side, we looked at what is water monitoring and how does that relate to OT risk. So in our environment, we are using a LoRaWAN network with LoRa sensors. So we need to consider what the implication is for the sensors, whether it's physical access or how can it be tampered with from in a remote way, and the next phase is then looking at the network monitoring. The intent of that is to do faster leak detection, to find faults. But the problem is, from a risk perspective, is what happens if that data is not available or if that data is wrong. Can you imagine we had the instance where we might have a reservoir. If that reservoir says it's at 50% or 80%, but it's in actual fact at 20%, you might have a problem in demands on the demand side. So those are the kinds of risks we need to consider when we implement solutions. The dashboards is there for operators as well as management to make decisions. It's important to see who has access to that and what type of access and control they have on these dashboards. We need to understand that in our world, these dashboards are for viewing and seeing what's going on from an operational view. But there might also be some type of controls where you can switch VSDs on or off, where we want to control pumps, or they can be automated. So there's a big risk in control in this environment. A lot of focus was also on pump and energy optimization. This is where the VSDs comes in, so that we can monitor that over time, see if we can bring about cost savings. But once again, unauthorized changes to those VSDs can have a big impact on operations, as well as a financial financial implications. And then smart metering. This is something I know there's been a lot of successes and failures in this space. So we are cautiously moving towards this, looking into this, not as much from a water supply side, but on the demand side. What's the impact of that? But then that also brings about risks to the user. There's data of the user there that could be exposed. So you might have a compliance issue there as well. From accountability, I'm not going to touch much on this. The intent of the thing I want to bring over is that accountability does not just lie with IT. The accountability is across the spectrum throughout the organization, from the engineers to IT to finance to internal audit. So our view is that everybody has a shared responsibility in this process and in these implementations. But these roles needs to be clearly defined. Who is accountable for what? I think the last statement is saying shared governance must not become shared confusion. So roles must be shared and accountability must be clear. That is an important factor for me, because there's a lot of decision makers that can, and people are always in the mix, and people can have an impact on any implementation in any process. So when we started with this process, there was a few challenges we had, or challenges that we would have liked to address. In our case, water and electricity networks are typically monitored with low reporting frequency. So people go there every now and then to check the levels, what's going on there. So we wanted a near real-time view of what's going on in the environment. What is going on at the boreholes, what's going on in our dams, in our reservoirs, and what is the impact on the network as well. Not only the usage and this on the supply and demand side, but also we needed to understand what is the impact on the network, in water network. We are not there yet. This we intend to go, but we want to see if there is. We have a lot of, in example, we might have a lot of pipe bursts. How can we better manage that? So there's a continuous flow of services, because our main purpose in municipalities is obviously service delivery. And then the energy, which is a key input in the treatment of water, in the distribution of water, there's a big cost to that. And if you lose water, that loss of water can relate to an additional cost in terms of energy consumption. So that's enough of the theoretical stuff. To give you an idea of where we started, when we started with this, we realized that everything needs to be connected, but there's also needs to be a relation between our corporate network and the operational technology network. But we also realized we don't want these two worlds to actually collide unless it is really necessary. So we started out building our own LoRaWAN network for these various sensors, but quite soon we've realized that might not always be the one and only network infrastructure that you need. There's numerous ways of connecting these devices, but doing it in a secure manner is the most important thing. So this is just an overview of the water conservation and demand management project that we started with. At this stage, we are monitoring boreholes, reservoirs, dams, and electricity consumption and everything around that. So the implementation, we had a lot of growing pains, a lot of issues trying out a lot of different types of sensors, building control units. finding the right solution. And then, so this was not an overnight solution, just plug and play. We tried to develop something specifically that is working for Cape Agulhas municipality and not a normal off-the-shelf product. And by doing this, we've actually tried to adopt a methodology around that, a value loop methodology, which is based on a IoT and development methodology, where we first looked at. We always said we need to consider people, process, and technology, and where does these various aspects fit into this development cycle. So we created a cycle where we started implementing, we measured the data, they had to be communicated, aggregated, and then analyzed, and also visualized, so that people can see, does this data and information make sense to them? And then we go through this whole loop until we find that we are at a place where we can move on to the next implementation or the next solution or the next problem that was defined that we want to focus on. So the first phase was we wanted to digitize all our water network assets. We wanted to enable collection of real-time data, and then also empower infrastructure operators to actually see what's going on in the environment and how they can then change the operating procedures or adapt the operating procedures to make this more, bring efficiencies into the water network infrastructure. So the first thing we try to define what was a network. So there's a supply side of the in the water network, where we have various assets that needed to be monitored from the sources, which might be dams or boreholes, to the storage, to the water treatment plants, where that is cleaned up until where the clean storage is clean water is stored and then distributed to the demand side, which is the users of the public. So here you can clearly see where we move that to the demand side. But to do this, we actually had to implement sensors across the board. But this can become very expensive. So we had to find ways to make it a bit more cost effective for the municipality to get to the same result. And that iterative loop I spoke about, that brought about a lot of thinking, a lot of discussions, a lot of testing of solutions to find the most cost-effective solution over time that we can reuse as we go along. So here's just an example of what we are doing now. Currently, we are doing real-time borehole level monitoring. So we just give you an indication. This is one of our sites in Napier, where we can see what the level is of the water in the borehole. So this is important for aquifer and water license management. When last the flow changed of that, so we are monitoring the depth as well as flow, and then you get an overview of the energy consumption over time and that is energy consumption that comes from monitoring the VSDs. So then we also wanted to measure what is going out to the demand side. Once again, we can monitor the boreholes and on the reservoirs, the levels and the flow thereof, and then we can correlate that to, at this stage, we are correlating that to the actual meter readings that is taken by meter readers on a monthly basis. And that relates to what is available in the water network. So we obviously always need to understand from a water balance and from a water demand side, we need to ensure that we have enough water available to supply to the demand side. Because if there is it's not only about supply and demand, but it's also about managing the infrastructure. Pipes that runs empty could lead to other damages and things like that. So we need to monitor that as well. And then, as I said, this is an example of the water supply side on there's one of our dams where we can measure the dam levels depending on the implementation and how you use that. In this case, we use this either for storage or so this is raw water storage that is then pumped to the treatment plants, either directly or it is bypassed to another plant or other tanks. And at the end of the day, this is a view of our whole system from the supply to demand side. Initially, you will see a lot of sensory equipment there for different reasons. So you need to ensure that you implement these solutions where it makes the most sense. So you don't spend unnecessary a lot of money on equipment that you're not actually going to monitor something. I think that's one of the important things. to ultimately identify also where missing water is, where leakages are, we are losing water. In some instances, we found that at borehole level, there might be a non-return valve that's not working. Just by implementing a solution that was quickly identified, which meant that we actually spent a lot less money on pumping water, which led to inefficiencies and led to the huge cost. Just the rest of these slides is just an overview of a few images of our implementation. You can see this is a control point where we monitor the water that comes from our biggest dams. So we can, in real time or near real time, it's usually about, depending on when last it changed, it will update. But on about every 1 to 2 minutes, it will give us an updated view of what's going on in our environment. So that's why we say a near real time monitoring solution that we've implemented. So the current expected results, we want to enhance the ability to manage efficiency and flexibility of utility services. We want to see if there's a reduction in energy consumption. Is there leaks and non-revenue water losses? We can see that the intent is to see that in close to real time. We want to optimize the pump efficiency. I spoke about that. The cost of I think, in actual fact, I don't think we've looked at our biggest consumer for electricity internal to the organization is for water distribution. So that is a big consideration. How do we make our biggest electrical usage in the municipality? How do we make that more efficient? And then essentially, the intent for smart metering is not only revenue enhancement, but also other things like credit control and so on that we can make it useful. So I think from OT security, I know my time is almost up. We're looking at asset registers, device sensors. So the asset, knowing where your assets are is one of the most important things, I think, to understand. If we know what our assets are and where it sits, we can start planning around that. We need to understand who owns those assets, who's responsible for those assets, who can access it. Make sure we have, when it comes to access, the separate accounts. And so from a OT control perspective, we need to ensure all these elements are in place. These are just a few frameworks that we consider when we do implementation. So you can see them there. I'm not going to go into detail with them. I think it might come up in this discussion. And then a few lessons that we've learned in this process is we need to understand what's going on in this case, the water environment. What is going on? What is going on for networks at every stage and of the implementation, and where we sit in this implementation. We need to know what's the cost of these things. What is it that we want to monitor? What is it that we want to control? What is it on the operational level? What the operators want to do? So yeah, that is important things, and this is just another of our current implementation. Here you can see a full view of where all the nodes are that we are monitoring, and the various aspects like the dams and the boreholes. We are doing sewage pits. Yeah, there's environmental impact on sewage pits that's not controlled if it runs over and things like that. And then from our water treatment plant perspective, here's a full view of one of our water and treatment plants from the supply side to the water treatment plant to the distribution to the demand side. Yeah, and that's my story. Thank you, David. I think that is it. This is just, we are also starting on the electricity side, and then we are doing a few other things. Just to show you, I'm not sure if you can see these, but probably not. So these are a few sensors we are trying on managing our buildings efficiencies. So these are a few things we are busy with as well. So thank you.
Right, thank you, Willem. Before I'm going to hand over to Gavin, I had a question from somebody about Cape Agulhas that I'm going to put out to you. How did the relationship develop between you and the technical department for this? It's a combined project to be managed between IT and the technical department.
Sure. Yeah, let me start out with this. Always challenges. I think especially when two different departments or two different fields of work come together. But this started out with another idea of a smart city concept in 2017, 2018, which was, I think you said, what was the word you were using? Is it a dream or a vision or you need to... So that was the intent. We did a lot of research on that. And then one of the key aspects that when we started with that, we realized that the smart city concept is not about the term smart city, it's about the methodology and the approach around that, a collective approach in the organization, because infrastructure has an impact on finance and credit control and the services and the resources that people use. So it's a lot bigger than just operational technology, operations, supplying services, but we also got to consider the other departments like finance, risk management, internal audit, that all played a role. So at that stage, how it started as the then manager of the water department had an issue on water licensing, where they did manual dippings, manual readings of bores, but that happened once a month, maybe once a week, not as frequently. And you can imagine, but in our busy season, things in our holiday season over December, we go from 5,000 to 6,000 people to 100,000 people. Then by taking readings, it's almost, the aquifers is really under strain in those periods. So we started having that discussion. We at that stage already had a service provider appointed for these smart implementations, and that's just how it started. It was actually a request from the infrastructure department on this. But I think the key thing was the planning that happened beforehand was very important to be in place. So when they came to us to find a solution, we already had a dream about a year or two before that. We started on building on that dream. And then when the planning part was in place. So I think that's important. Plan your things. So when the partners do engage one another, you at least have something to go on already. You don't have to start from scratch. And then I think the most important thing is please do engage the IT departments, because I think they can add value throughout the municipality. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Willem. We're going to hand over to Gavin. Gavin, you can take over and introduce yourself, please.
Morning, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Gavin Gresser. I'm the ICT manager at Bitter Municipality. I've had the privilege of looking after this municipality for just over 10 years now. Prior to my existence here, I worked for some prominent service providers, servicing local government. Prior to that, I lived abroad in the United Kingdom, where I worked for a fairly large family-owned construction company for about 5 years, looking after some fairly large infrastructure that traversed 350 sites across the United Kingdom. So I've gone from sort of looking after large infrastructure to sort of smaller infrastructure, being a consultant, and then sort of ended up here at the Bitter Municipality. So I see it as a privilege, and I love what I do. It's an absolute passion. David's going to know me by now that I'm going to depart a little bit from probably the mandate. And maybe, David, if you could just give me an opportunity to maybe ask David another question, ask Willem another question. Willem, just quickly, as a point of departure, how does your structures that you just presented to us, do they live on the IDP? I'm not sure what the equivalent private sector strategic document would be, but has it manifested towards being a public document that outlines your master plans in terms of what you're looking to deploy and the value you're going to create?
Sure, that's a loaded question. So to give you a quick answer that I really do is yes, it does live on our IDP. It also lives on our top layer SDBIP, where it sits specifically. So what we've done is we looked at the master plans. We linkage to that in the National Development Plan and all those plans. But in terms of the IDP, it sits as a top layer KPI for the municipality. which is because it's seen as strategic for the municipality. I think that's is that answering your question?
Yeah, no, sure. Look, I mean, I think it's important that the public also understand the benefits of what, I mean, smart city is a buzzword, but you know, the understanding that what we're trying to deliver and the value it's going to create, the efficiencies it's going to create. It's a part of our panel discussion. I'll probably raise some of these as well. That are we deriving value from our IoT? Is the IoT there because it's the buzzword of the day, or are we delivering it as a means to provide services, value for money, and public service? Those are sort of where I guess being on the IDP means that we're transparent to the public, and that's more of a public sector sort of viewpoint. I suppose from a private sector viewpoint, you're probably going to be looking at it more as a shareholder value creation and that sort of idea. So I'll jump. Thank you, Willem. So I'll jump into my presentation again. As I said, David knows me. I will jump around a little bit where I can. Can everyone just can you guys just confirm you can see my presentation?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Excellent. It's displaying correctly.
No, it's not full screen yet.
Okay, let me just full screen it. Superb. So, as I said, I will take some liberties here and there. I'm going to start with something, and you can see behind me, for those who can see behind me, and those who know what it is that's behind me, that is probably one of the largest IoT devices you'll see on the planet. It is a multi-tiered IoT device. So those that don't know, on this side, you've got the Super Booster, the Starship Booster, which is coming into landing on a tower, and you can see it landing on the tower. Here you can see the Starship at the top and the booster at the bottom, and they're busy launching into space. The most phenomenal thing about those two devices behind you is that they exist wirelessly through a Starlink network, and the Starlink networks themselves are enablers for IoT and for smart cities, meaning we have satellites above us that are allowing us to connect devices on the ground level. Just anecdotally, I suppose I was watching, for those who watch Clarkson's Farm, you will actually have noticed on season 4, I think it is, where they have the autonomous tractors who are drilling and plowing the land. Those autonomous devices are essentially IoT devices. I think that the paradigm that we must understand is that IoT devices are not necessarily small little devices hidden around on the surface of the earth or in businesses on top of towers. They can be large pieces of equipment that launch into the stratosphere. And in fact, when this becomes operational, it's going to be carrying IoT devices into LEO, allowing us to connect more IoT devices, probably in a much larger scale than what we see with Sigfox and various other networks that we connect. So I just wanted to put it to you that we must understand and reinvent what we believe to be IoT. It doesn't necessarily have to be a small camera or a thermometer in a casino, in a fish pond. It can be big devices. And these devices, I mean, as a small example, if we're talking about the cyber side of things, if this particular device got compromised through a Starlink link, that is a multi-ton device carrying large amounts of methane and liquid oxygen. If it had to land on a domestic area, it would be devastating. So the risks go from catastrophic in this case right down to perhaps you lost a little bit of data here and there. Perhaps a threat actor gained access to your network and exfiltrated some data. So it is life-threatening in one hand, and it could just be benign in the other. So, I mean, again, as my slides indicate, smart cities and OT security foundations, and it is about what we protect, but what we envisage to use these IoT devices, what we envisage to use these IoT devices for, and then how we protect them. I'd love to have a conversation with me 20 years ago to understand how would I felt about this conversation today, knowing that where we were 20 years ago, we didn't have the same lingo, we didn't really have the same care for devices that we placed on the network. Often we would just put them on the network because we didn't fear what we didn't know. So OT security smart settings, I'm going to run through a lot of these. The slides I really want to talk about are further on, and I'm not going to keep us long because I think the panel discussion has got way more value than me rambling on about a few slides. So look, I'm not a big fan of the term smart city. I think it does really depend upon the audience and the culture that you're talking to. So in some cultures, it's really going to work and they'll have a good understanding of what smart city means. And I think in others, they might think it's an autonomous bot-driven organization. And I think the balance sits somewhere in between. It's going to always bring challenges into the environment. And I think the biggest challenge, and the one I'll focus a little bit more on, is sort of the attack surface it presents to the organization. It presents a much broader attack surface, but it doesn't have to be as dire or dangerous as we perceive it to be. I think that the dangers of IoT devices, in my personal opinion, probably stems from its historical use in networks. Specifically, if you look at a lot of what Willem had indicated, a lot of the older equipment, the older SCADA equipment that wasn't built with security in mind, has become a problem for us in the future. And that's the 20 years ago, Gavin, I'd like to talk to and say, do you realize that the equipment you're putting in place now is not security first? It is security second, meaning we built some applications to be useful in a field, and then we thought about the security afterwards. This is potentially the headache that we're sitting with today in terms of why are we struggling with the concept of OT? I mean, if we had thought about it 20 years ago, we would just be dealing with it like any other security, any other device on the network. It would have ability to be secured, have certificates, be security first, conceptually designed, rather than I was delivering a service first. So the context and framing in the IoT space is people-centric smart cities. I'll go back to my pet pain about smart cities is that we think it is a technology shift in the main, and it is, and depending, I guess, on the sector, depending on what you're trying to achieve, it may be. If you're a technology only business and you're sitting on the edge of the internet and you're delivering services, you might be just a technology centric business. But if I look at it from our perspective and many perspectives, it's people centric. People will drive the technology and people will need to protect it. So if you look at it from an IT perspective, we're going to protect it, but equally we need to create value for the organization. And that is always going to be people-centric. I like to use the water metering scenario, and in my environment, I always like to say we need to encourage our water meters, that we're not trying to put them, our water meter readers, we're not trying to put them out of work. We need to re-envisage how they deliver value to the organization once they're no longer required to read the meters. And I think that value can be exponentially created by having them interacting with customers, making sure that the devices in the ground are managed, maintained, working, and that they engage with service providers where the systems are working. So I think if we are people-centric, we also realize that although we will put technology in the ground, the people-centric side should remain. Core of the smart city technologies, I think Willem did a much better job than I'm going to do. He's quite deep into this environment. So, I mean, it's SCADA systems, it's smart metering, it's camera surveillances, and integration and cyber risks. So I think we'll get, in our panel discussion, we'll probably get a bit deeper into that. I'm going to skip a couple of slides because I want to get us to the panel discussion rather than you hearing me talk. This perhaps is the one area I really wanted to probably just touch on a little bit more, and it's one of the areas that I have great pains with. Modern mobile devices are not often seen as IoT devices, but allowing our staff, our third parties, our guests to bring mobile devices, which in their nature, maybe today it's a little bit better, but the Play Store was a wild west for a very long time, and it posed huge amounts of risk. So placing those bring your own disasters, as we do paraphrase it from time to time, when we bring those devices into our working environments and we allow them to connect to our networks, we allow them to connect to our laptops and devices, they pose exponential threats. Now, I chose this as a quick topic just to break the paradigms of our regular understanding of what an IoT device is, much like I've brought Starship into the conversation, mostly to say it doesn't have to be the things that we are always reading about in terms of the thermometer, it's a camera. It can be other things. The attack surface is very broad, and we need to be very aware of where that attack surface is going to affect us. So we have an expanded IT risk surface. It's not just the common things. It's not necessarily just a smart meter in the ground or a smart electrical meter or a Sigfox network. It can be other devices, and we need to expand our sort of our scope of understanding of how those infrastructure impact our networks. In the old days, we would have air gapped a lot of this infrastructure, but integration has meant that is an inconceivable means of using IoT, because you want to really collect the data, make good business decisions on that data. So human device factors, and this is really how I was going with it. Human behavior is a huge risk. I mean, IoT devices are often considered to be sort of static devices lying in the ground somewhere, and their risk might be a third party might compromise the device and gain access to your network. But it equally can be the devices and the equipment that our staff, our guests, our invitees to come to our organizations bring with them when they are invited into our environment. So connecting them into our environments is the risk essentially that we're bringing to the fore. Allowing someone to connect a mobile phone to their laptop is going to bring new sources of risk. Allowing them to connect to a guest network that is perhaps not vulnerability scanned, checked, configuration checked regularly, documented and managed might pose risks across your network space. And then the big topic is always going to be the cyber risk, the compliance and the governance. And again, I'm probably not going to jump into this too deeply because I think we have some structured discussions within the panel discussion. But again, I think we all are quite fatigued in terms of discussions about cyber. We talk about it, we hear it on the news, we understand people get compromised. But we can't gloss over the fact that third-party risk management, that risk management of those devices, understanding where those devices exist and how we treat them, and then how we treat them from a governance and compliance perspective is essential. It is essential. Look, I'm come from a technical background, so I tend to protect first and govern later. But it is an essential collaboration between those two to make sure that we protect our environments. And again, accountability. So I'm probably going to scoosh over these and just take us to the end so that we can move on to the last presentation and the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Handing over to Aaron. Please introduce yourself.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Great to be back on the Civic Coffee Klats. I'm going to just start my presentation. Let me know when you do see it.
It's on.
It's on?
Yes.
All right,
Thank
great.
you.
Technology is working well this morning. Thank you so much. So once again, good morning, everybody. My name is Aaron Hendrikse from Tutukani Technology Solutions, or 2TS for short. My role is Head of Business Development for the coastal region of South Africa. You may remember me from the previous Coffee Klats, where I spoke about operational technology and cybersecurity in smart cities. So to start off with, as municipalities rely heavily on technology to achieve its goals and objectives, I wanted to start off by discussing the business risk and impact of an OT cybersecurity incident to the business. So all the risks I'm going to mention now on this slide are from a commercial or revenue loss perspective. And I think a word that David used at the introduction of the session is how it impacts financial sustainability. Very key point there. Thanks for that, David. That's a new word in my dictionary as such. So if you look at the losses, loss of business operational downtime. So this is the largest portion of costs for OT breaches. As municipal services, transport, utility billing systems go offline, for an average they save about 7 days, depending on the resilience of the network and your incident response plan. We look at detection and escalation. So the costs related to forensic investigation, auditing, initial investigations, that sort of thing runs into millions of rands. I don't think we do realize the financial impact of these detection and escalations. Restoration and post-breach responses, the cost for bringing the systems back online, the level of resilience, how quickly can you recover from a breach, what level of redundancy is there, Can you fail over to a manual process while your systems are offline? These are all the considerations with regards to the commercial and financial loss of a, let's say, municipality, because we are speaking about smart cities as such. This is very important, and I think Gavin spoke about this. We speak about governance, regulatory fines, and legal issues. There's potential penalties under the POPI Act. We know the POPI Act very well. And the Cyber Crimes Act, which I don't think a lot of us think about. So the questions are, has customer data been leaked? Are critical services like hospitals been negatively impacted by water or electricity disruptions? And then last but not least, very important, public trust. And that's what it's all about for municipalities. They would maybe ask the question, should I rather install solar panels or JoJo tanks as the municipality supply is not reliable? That is a business impact for a municipality. So, the total cost to a smart city for a moderate OT breach in South Africa, I've researched this, it's in the region of 60 million rand per incident. That is what is said. I can't vet that as such, but that's what I've researched. And that's on a small incident. So what would the cost typically be for a large or major breach? So this leads me to why city engineers consider OT cybersecurity critical. Here are a few of the reasons. So operational technology or OT security is critical for engineers in smart cities. Why? Because it bridges the gap between digital management systems and physical infrastructure. So as cities integrate Internet of Things, sensors to control water, Gavin touched on this, Willem touched on this as well, sensors to control water, power grids, traffic lights, and transportation. OT security ensures that these systems remain functional, reliable, and safe. These are key words: functional, reliable, and safe. So a breach to these systems does not just steal data like we know in the IT space. It can cause physical damage, threaten public safety, and disrupt essential city services. For engineers, city engineers, prioritizing OT security is therefore necessary for several key reasons. I'm going to go through a couple of them. Preventing physical disruption and safety risk. We speak about this all the time. Unlike IT systems that compromise, OT system can directly affect physical infrastructure, such as contaminating water supplies, causing power outages, or malfunctioning traffic control systems. Securing critical infrastructure. Smart city technologies rely on automation, which introduces vulnerabilities. Engineers must ensure these interconnected, obviously legacy systems are protected from hackers looking to cause widespread havoc. Security by design. In urban planning, engineers must integrate security into the design phase of infrastructure, such as their HVAC systems, lighting, building management systems, rather than patching it in later. So unfortunately, we've got a lot of legacy OT systems or in our networks, and this hasn't been done. I think this is what Gavin touched on when he reflects on 10 or 20 years previously. Then we ensure data integrity of operations. Smart cities rely on accurate real-time data from sensors to work. Willem spoke about this, the dam level sensor saying 80%, but it could be 20% if that sensor was breached for whatever reason or whichever way. So if this data is corrupted, automated decisions could lead to inefficient or dangerous outcomes. Managing convergence risks, the integration of IT and OT increases the attack surfaces, providing more entry points for threats, making it vital to separate and protect these systems, prevent unauthorized access. So the separation of IT and OT is something that Peter Vierbergen is going to speak about after I've completed my part of the presentation. Protecting system trust and safety. This is actually, I should have put this top of the list. I put it there as last but not least, but very important. Ensuring operational resilience means creating systems that can withstand cyber attacks or natural disasters, thus maintaining public safety and confidence. Very important, maintaining public safety and confidence. So engineers must adopt a cyber-informed engineering approach, which involves evaluating cyber risks, alongside safety and functionality. So many times I get asked the question, can we use my IT cybersecurity for OT? So the answer is, in simple terms, no. Why do I say that? Traditional IT security is not good enough. It can work in certain instances, but not good enough for operational technology security on its own. So while they share foundational principles, IT security prioritizes different priorities differ significantly from the requirements of industrial systems. So often making these standard IT tools and approaches disruptive or ineffective in OT environments. Here are some of the key reasons why IT security tools fail in OT. So fail on its own in OT environments, not necessarily you. Anyway, let me continue. I'm not going to get too deep into that. I think I want to get to the end of the presentation so we can get into the panel discussion. So system fragility and legacy assets. So these are some of the reasons why IT security fails in OT environments. OT systems often use decades-old legacy hardware, we mentioned that cannot handle active scanning or frequent updates that IT systems can. Zero tolerance for downtime. I think this is a no-brainer. IT systems can usually be patched and rebooted with minimal impact. Take your Windows PC, for example. You update the software, the restart your computer, you're inconvenienced for a couple of minutes and you continue your work. If you look at the OT environment, shutting down a PLC, for example, or SCADA to install an update can stop, for example, supply of water, cause massive financial losses, cause safety hazards, and very unhappy customers. I think that's bottom line. I think we've all experienced that when it comes to electricity. We're not going to go into that one more. Proprietary protocols, very important. IT tools, security tools understand typically TCP and UDP protocols, but often do not understand proprietary industrial protocols like Modbus, TNP, S3, and OPC, that sort of thing. Agent limitations, this is very important and key. Many OT devices cannot support endpoint security agents, commonly used in IT that consumes a lot of resources on these devices, like your memory and your CPU usage. So OT systems are typically lightweight in design. Any additional resources may run additional resources that run active agents on these OT devices may not be supported. That is the reason why OT security tools are usually passive, monitoring traffic typically on the switch band port for the technology people on this call, understanding what a span port is. And then lastly, active scanning disruptions, vulnerability scanners that work safely in IT can possibly cause harm for OT equipment and cause them to crash or fail. So I'm out of time basically, but quickly just to talk about the main difference between IT and OT cybersecurity, because obviously we know there's a convergence in the digitized world of IT and OT. So these are the primary goals of IT security: confidentiality, protection of data. In the OT space, it's safety and availability to keep processes running. Priority in the IT world, data protection. In the OT world, it is physical safety and reliability and uptime. From a patching perspective of these endpoints, typically it's frequent automatic for IT. In OT is rare, high risk for disruption. Assets in the IT environment is your laptops, your servers, your cloud, which you all know. In the OT space, which Willem and Gavin mentioned, it's your PLCs, your SCADAs, your sensors, which we call IoT devices. And then lastly, your system life with regards to IT is usually 3 to 5 years. You change your laptop within that time period. I'm using that example. And the OT space, 10 to 30 years, you basically set and forget. That's the terminology used in those areas. So with the convergence of IT and OT, there needs to be network segmentation between IT and OT systems, and even further segmentations within the OT systems to ensure that the data flows only where it must and nowhere else. That is very important. So with that, I would like to hand over to Pieter Vierbergen, who will discuss IT and OT network segmentation in more detail. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Yeah, I'll go through a bit more technical side of OT security. First of all, we'll start with that infrastructure, as Aaron mentioned. So what we have normally in here is the Purdue model. So this is a reference model that was created in the 1990s for specific OT architecture, moving into the digital transformation age, where you need to start connecting these systems for visibility or for access or any kind of control from an IT side into these networks. So this reference model looks something like this. So you have different levels in here, focusing on different kind of network segments that you need to have, and then segregate them from each other. So just a few of them here. So level 0, 1, 2, and 3. These were your normal standard traditional OT networks that you had. So these were isolated networks. They were normally set and forget. So they were built and they were working, and they were left alone. They were running your municipal water, your electricity, all of that systems were automated, and no one really touched it except for some maintenance that need to happen regularly. But with the digital transformation, there were some few layers added here, where these needed to start connecting into your IT systems, or actually going to internet sites. So that's where they introduced level 3.5. So this is your industrial DMZ. This is just to allow the communication from the OT still in a secure manner outside to your internet facing or your IT side. And then at the top, you'll have your IT specific network. Now, this model emphasize actually the movement between these networks or communication between them, where, for instance, you'll only be allowed to go one level up or one level down. That's the communication limit. You're not supposed to be communicating from level 3 to level 0. That is completely breaking the model. It's not aligning with the model standards. So this is just a fundamental way of securing your OT network from the internet side, as well as enforcing that defense in depth to reduce actually your cyber risk from IT to OT networks. And this enables your segmented controls, so you have clear communication boundaries between these networks. And then also the evolution of this has expanded in such a way that IoT may be sitting at certain levels here, like level 2, and it's communicating directly out to the internet. That actually breaks this, and that introduces certain kind of risks in your network, where it controls critical infrastructure. Like Gavin mentioned, there's a lot of critical infrastructure that might break if that rockets are being tampered with, or falls on buildings and things. That is a key disruption that can be caused by leveraging attacks on these systems. Now, for instance, for securing these systems, it's very important to understand what you are securing, and this can normally be done through assessment or actually implementation of a solution that can monitor these systems. First, we're going to talk over a assessment. So what do we normally look at in assessment? So Willem mentioned you need to identify these assets. You need to know what you have in the network, and that's key for any kind of assessment, because if you don't know what you have, how do you protect it? So if you don't know what's out there, how do you protect that specific asset or infrastructure component? So you need to do a visibility and then assessment on the vulnerability and risk within that different networks and assets. And then specifically, why do we want to do this kind of assessment? It's normally done for a reduction in your operational risk, improvement of your security. So this helps you put certain guardrails in place after assessment, make sure you have a consolidated view, everything is controlled in a correct manner to prevent attacks on your systems. So this is why we normally do a kind of assessment on your environment. And then how, as Aaron mentioned also, you can't do like active scanning, go out, collect everything you want on these systems. They are very sensitive because they use layer 2 communication, certain protocols that needs low latency. So you need to do more of a passive detection. So you need to passively discover all of these assets, do vulnerability analysis and control validation on them. So this is how you would perform such an assessment. And then when would you normally do this kind of assessments? So these assessments are usually during digital transformation, like before you go into digital transformation, connecting your OT to IT systems, or before and after major changes that you made to the network infrastructure or to device infrastructure. Or you can also do it as a periodical assessment where you just go over, make sure all the controls are still in place, nothing changed. As we all know, there's that shadow IT living in the background, making changes that no one really knows about, or the operations team on the ground, engineers might change things to make it work, but no one knows about those changes. So that just comes and highlights those to you. And then normally where would that assessment take place? So this is normally across industrial environments. So this includes things like your control rooms, your substations, power plants, factories, any kind of SCADA networks, or any kind of network we have like PLCs, human machine interfaces, or any kind of OT data centers that you might have. You might have automation data center that's actually sending instructions over the internet. You might need to assess that as well, if that communication is clear. And that's just from a pure assessment view. And then for implementation of a solution of this caliber, so we'll have like OT implementation. So we'll start off in 4 phases. The first one is actually starting to engage stakeholders. This is both IT and OT teams. So you need to engage both of them, make sure they understand what you're about to embark on, and then also define your objectives. What is your objective with actually implementing such a solution? Is it to gain full asset visibility, implementing threat detection, or achieving certain compliance within your operational network? But that's the first phase where you'll normally engage with everyone. And then it also comes to where the responsibility lies. As Willem mentioned, who is responsible for what? That needs to be also stated in this phase. Then phase 2 is your deployment and visibility. So this is normally where you start deploying the sensors. You install them on networks, like Aaron mentioned, you connect it to the span ports to have the visibility of your production environment. And then the automated discovery starts. So it automatically starts discovering all your assets through the communication. And then you enrich that data you have to get the full visibility of your complete network, what is communicating to what, and then you start normalizing a baseline to say, okay, this is what is normally expected within our network. And then you set that as a secure policy to say, okay, this is what we trust. And then everything outside of that should be normally alerted on. Which brings us to the third phase. So that's your threat and anomaly detection. So anything that's outside the boundaries of that baseline we built. And then also the threat detection if there's any kind of malware, anything running over the network. So this is more continuous monitoring where the system goes out and monitors any kind of detected anomalies within the network, unauthorized access, any new devices that might be connected. As Gavin mentioned, those phones that come onto your network. If that device could detect it, then you know about it. You say, okay, we have to identify the risk. We need to remove those devices or segregate that kind of network from our network. And then also vulnerability assessment. That happens continuously. So that also monitors for any kind of vulnerabilities on these devices that you have within your operational technology network, be it the PLC or your VSD devices, anything that can expose you to a threat. And then finally, you want to reduce that risk that you have. So first of all, you need to have a central management console because you might have sites that's kilometers and kilometers from each other. You need to consolidate all of that data into a central management interface that you can identify your risk and say, okay, what do we have where and how do you actually start addressing them? So that's where the risk prioritization comes into play. So focus on the most critical or the highest risk scores that you have, prioritize the highest risk. That might not always be a risk to a specific vulnerability, but to actual risk in your organization, like if that water treatment plant fails, the downtime might be 2-3 weeks, and then there's no water supply for that amount of time. Or like Aaron mentioned as well, the hospital networks, you need to provide them with water and electricity. If it can't provide them with that, then there's a critical reliance that's broken, so that hospital can't function as needed. People can't go to hospital, they get sick, and that expands on the human safety side. And then finally, once you have this base in place, you might need to integrate this with your SOC, so your Security Operations Center, where they actually get these alerts and are notified to say, oh, there's some malicious actor trying to break into our OT network. Can we find them? Let's close those gaps. So it's quicker response when this actually goes up to that SOC level. So it's a full level for your IT and OT, and also combining it with your security layer, your SOC that you have, to give you the full stack of security in these IT, OT combined networks. Then that is it from my side.
Thank you very much, Aaron and Peter. Thanks for your presentation. I'm making notes as Peter's speaking, and I think I'm going to ask him questions, and then he answers my question with his next statement. So I don't have anything additional to ask. Okay, the format we're going forward is I'm going to pose a couple of questions to the panel, and I would then open the floor for questions from the floor. So we're not going to keep the panel discussions very long. It's going to be very consolidated in order to give you time to ask questions. The questions are going to be structured in 3 levels: accountability, risk, and technology. So my first question is going to go to a combination of Gavin and Willem. So in a smart city environment with IT and OT convergence, who ultimately holds the accountability for cybersecurity risk, and how can we ensure that shared responsibilities does not lead to a lack of accountability? So it's all about the risk. How do we manage and share the risk? Willem and Gavin, can you switch on your cameras, please? I'm going to hand over to you, Gavin, to respond first, and then to Willem.
So my thinking around this area is, where does the accountability lie? I think it would depend largely on the maturity of the organization. It's not going to be a one size fits all. But I think in a perfect world, if we lived in a perfect world, you would really want there to be a strategic objective in terms of what you want to achieve and the value you want to create with the equipment that you bring into the environment. And that really extends beyond OT equipment. It extends to any ICT related equipment, software and services that we provide. Why are we providing it? What is the value we're trying to create? And can we measure that value at the end? So in that way, we must understand that if we have, it kind of links to the conversation I had with Willem momentarily before I presented, was in a public sector setting, we would imagine that ownership is taken where we influence council to put projects onto our IDP in order to deliver services that are going to improve the value that we create to the public. Now, you could extend that to a hospital where there's a group of directors, a board of directors, and that board of directors would also need to understand, if I'm going to have OT devices, all my surgical equipment is going to be OT connected. Here are the risks, and how am I going to manage? The ownership is going to reside at the top and permeate its way down. Willem?
Yeah, so I think from a ownership and risk perspective, this is not only, traditionally people will think the project manager or the person running the project is responsible for everything. But I think depending on the type of implementation, there's various role players that play a role, from decision makers to internal audit and risk management to the operational team in IT. Even supply chain and the finance department plays a role in the success of a project. So when we are thinking ownership and accountability, we might be thinking, is it project-based? Or is it, as Gavin has rightly said, is it from a strategic point of view, there's different role players and different accountabilities. So I think those days where IT do IT things, infrastructure does infrastructure things, those worlds are merging as we move into the I don't want to say the new world, that sounds like we're going somewhere, in the fourth industrial revolution, or whatever you want to call it. You can give it, I suppose, any name you want to, but accountability lies for me where the project is going and where the implementation is going. So that has to be clearly defined in the beginning when you set your goals and things.
So if we just look at it from, there's obviously multiple layers here. So you've got the layer of, we want to achieve something. We're going to decide how we're going to achieve it. So we're going to influence leaders and strategic direction of the organization. Then at sort of a lower layer, I like to use the analogy, everyone's a blue teamer. Everybody. There should never be a concept of you're a blue teamer and you're a business analyst and you're a system engineer. Everyone's a blue teamer. If everybody is taking responsibility for cybersecurity, be it on the application side, the networking side, on the OT side, if everyone's taking responsibility, then your accountability becomes a lot easier, because everybody is understanding that everything contains risk. And again, we touched on it. It's about knowing what you have. In a green fields, you will know what you have because you bring it in. But the OT side is sort of a web of older devices, as I indicated earlier, that were never designed or developed with security in mind. It was an afterthought because as we evolved. So those two layers are really important. I think sometimes we forget there's sort of strategic accountability, governance risk, and sort of any auditing that happens. And then there's sort of operational accountability, where we as I say, we're all blue teamers. We're all blue teaming all day long to make sure that our environment is managed, documented, and it is, at least we understand where our indicators of compromise might become. Sort of risk management. Like I like to take devices and say, well, I look at a device, whatever it is, OT or not, you assess it. How much risk do you pose my environment? And that accountability will, in my environment, resides with me. The strategic resides with the council. Willem or David?
Yeah, if I may, I think whenever we do a new implementation or new project or whatever it might be, it's not necessarily related. So we've got this tendency to think operational. We're obviously talking about operational technology today, but in the in the smart city space, it could be something that's not necessarily IT related, but ultimately, irrespective if it's OT or just an IT risk or implementation, I think the ultimate accountability we need to remember is still as an institutional risk, always lies with the accounting officer. So he needs to be, I think, having him on board, having executive management on board, buying into any project or risk, and adopted by even councillors. They need to be informed of what is going on, and they need to understand what it is that we are trying to achieve, and those benefits that we can reap out of that. They've got a role to play as well. So I think Gavin, you are quite right to say everybody has an accountability role. It just differs on the type of what their part is in that implementation or strategic roadmap that you are trying to implement.
And I think the question was touching on the shared responsibility. So shared responsibility is always a risk, where you're sharing responsibilities across two departments or across two strategic directorates, where the lack of accountability might occur due to one party believing the other party is accountable. And so that's where RACE is such a beautiful thing, right? It outlines it quite clearly. It says you're responsible, you're accountable, you're informed, and now we know. And I think that's probably the key underpinnings of the question, is that we mustn't build ourselves into governance positions where the shared accountability means that it's easy for one party to obfuscate their responsibilities, whether it be security, whether it be governance, whether it be strategic, that we make sure that the responsibility has an owner.
Yeah, as a last item, I think the RACE model is a perfect example. It was I was trying to infer to when they talk about. I just couldn't get to the name at that stage, but if we clearly define those roles, there will be no confusion as who is responsible for what. I think that's the bottom line. Thanks.
Aaron, in this vein, can I ask you, in your interaction with local government, do you see that OT risk goes beyond a compliance exercise, where it's actually properly managed and it has proper ownership and it adds value to the organization?
David, so in my experience, and I think Gavin touched on this, if we look 10 or 20 years ago at what they call OT as such, we put these devices in our networks to fulfill a certain function, right? And we've continued to follow this methodology to where we are today. And in simple terms, let's be honest, some networks are in a state that can't be managed the way we want it to, specifically on the OT side. And it's not a blame game. I think it's just the way it's been deployed. That together with the digitization of the OT networks and the convergence or integration of OT and IT. And if you step back from the technology side of it and the compliance and the governments, and this is what Willem and Gavin also spoke about, the RACI model, having those clear set responsibilities within a organization or a team, be it IT, be it finance, be it whatever, and it becomes a value chain. A lot of municipalities, in my experience, have started the journey. Some are still doing paper-based studies. So municipalities, in my view, and the exposure in the Western Cape is they are on the right journey. Some are at the start, some are implementing, some are maturing, some are changing processes. So in my view, I would say that we're definitely going in the right direction. You've got to start somewhere, right? And I think the challenge is OT has been overlooked because whatever reasons, legacy processes, just the way it's been implemented, but it's not being overlooked anymore. And I think that's the important thing to note here. For its various reasons, for commercial, for customer trust. I mean, there's a lot of reasons we can give. So to summarize all that, David, and to answer your question, I think that municipalities in the Western Cape, and I haven't dealt with other municipalities in other areas, I say they are on the right journey to implement strategically and link to governance and compliance as the overarching umbrella, going in the right direction or in the right direction already to achieve what must be with regards to OT and IT environments and resilience in those areas.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. Peter, on your first slide where you had your levels, on the left-hand side, your link between the IT and the OT was the icon of a firewall. Can you explain what the role of that firewall is? Is the idea behind it segmentation between the two? How do you foresee a network design with that type with OT and IoT and IT security in mind?
Yes, thank you. So these systems were normally designed in an isolated way, and connecting them to this internet network, you need some layer of defense as well. So that's normally when you do this digitalization, there was normally a firewall placed in there and preventing certain communication and allowing only the key metrics to travel across between these networks. But that still imposes the risk because it's an IT firewall, it can be breached, you can come into the OT network. The more modern way, I think Gavin also touched on this, is the air gap. These systems can be air gap, but that lose some sort of functionality to these systems. There is now a solution that can be used to do unidirectional gateways to actually just allow you to extrapolate all the information you have in that OT network, provide it to the outside network, to your IT network for information. but then there is some level of control you lose from that, like Willem has implemented with his solution where you can turn on and off pumps. You lose that sort of functionality. So there is certain compromises you need to make to actually secure this environment, because there exist legacy systems in there, like systems running Windows XP, some systems that uses outdated software that cost millions to actually upgrade to get the latest version of that software. So these are vulnerable systems. They were not designed for security in mind. As Gavin mentioned, they were meant to fulfill a certain process. We built it to run a certain way, and that's what it needed to perform. So these engineers were focused on reliability and the outcome of that process it needs to handle. So there's a whole stigma around what should we actually do with this OT when we connect it externally. I see Gavin has a question or maybe a comment here.
It's Gavin.
I just wanted to make the comment that it's a lot about value at risk. You know, I love the analogy. There's no point protecting a R1 million asset with 50 million rand. Look, it comes down to something very critical. Are we protecting lives or protecting data? What do we actually protect? I think that's sometimes often not the consideration when we think about how we protect these assets. I think the important thing sometimes is we should identify the asset, which is very important. And if you find that you have an asset that is, let's look at a medical appliance device as an example that is conducting surgery. I have some great anecdotal stories about these, but I'll save it for another time. But the point being is that device might not suit being an OT device because of its pure sensitivity, in which case you air gap it. You say, look, the risk is too high, we're going to air gap it, or we're going to do bi-direction scheduled traffic, meaning that it cannot be compromised during certain times. Now, this is really sort of the important bit. You know, let's identify our sort of our OT devices and protect them accordingly with the concept of value at risk. And that's kind of the sort of decision about, do you air gap, do you not air gap, and then how do you do zero trust in relation to the device. Sometimes we forget we're also protecting tampering. We always think we're protecting against some sophisticated sort of threat actor that is coming into, and that's quite rare, I would imagine. I would imagine that insider threats pose just as much as a risk as, or maybe even more than an external threat actor or a nation state actor for that matter. I don't know what your thoughts are on that specific.
Yeah, so nation state actors, they actually compromise your internal users that cause that internal threat that you have. Like you mentioned, your rogue user that might plug in a USB somewhere, compromise something. So it is, yeah, as you said, about the value. What is the cost compared to the value you get out of that protection you have? Is it actually going to secure your network, or is it just something you're going to waste money on?
If I can just add something there, sorry, David, if I can just add something. Peter mentioned this, you know, as part of your OT assessment via your asset discovery, and you know, you can only protect what you know as such. So also linking to what Gavin said, you know, you've got your asset inventory, and then with that you can have your risk inventory, and that is where you're going to class the various OT devices on the criticality, like Gavin said. Some need to be air gapped. Others need bi-directional gateways. Others can go through a firewall. So it's not one shoe fits everybody as such. You need to have a clear understanding of your network. And I think that's a exclamation mark statement before we start throwing technologies at your network. Understand your environment first, I think, is the first step. And then apply a applicable solution in that environment. And as Gavin said, no use using a 50 million rand solution to protect the 10 million rand asset, as for example, you know. So yeah, that is my 2 cents on that subject.
So I often joke, just buy 5 of them. Keep 4 on the shelf. You know, if your value is 50 and you know your risk. So it is about risk management and identifying the assets. You know, some assets you can treat as you have done, treated network equipment for years, but identifying the equipment that is not easy to manage, that might fall over when you vulnerability scan. I mean, medical equipment is a great example. Would you want to conduct either a a pen test or a red hat exercise or a vulnerability scan while you're being operated on by with a medical device? You're probably not. You're going to want to treat that device very differently than perhaps you're treating the thermometer in the fish tank out in the lobby, right? So, and that's kind of, I guess, the understanding. Risk management is probably the cornerstone of how we classify and we treat devices. If a device has got low risk, low impact in our risk analysis, let's treat it like that. Treat it accordingly. I think risk management is the cornerstone. Sometimes we get involved in the acronyms and again, okay, you guys are like you're selling the technology, so it's very important for you to have structured. But then on the other side, we sit as customers, sometimes, it can be a little bit daunting. But I think fundamentally, if you just look at it as this is risk, this is risk I can accept, this is risk I cannot accept, and you treat it accordingly. I think that's the key takeaway. It doesn't have to be too overly complicated.
Okay, thank you for that. Aaron, where do we start with OT security in a municipality? What's our point of departure?
I think I mentioned that briefly now when we were discussing this previous topic with firewalls, for example. It depends where you are in your journey, right? Some are doing desktop studies as such at that point. Some have already departed and started implementing OT cyber risk management solutions in the environment based on the OT digital migration and the evolution of OT IT integration as such. And how do you segment that? And that's what Peter was talking about. So, Peter mentioned this. Typically would be your OT assessment, and because you need to understand your environment, you need to understand your networks, what you have in your network, what is legacy, what can be upgraded, what can't be upgraded, what are the risks associated with that, and I think Peter walked through that. So my answer to that, David, would be start with your assessment first. Understand your environment before you go any further with any solution, because. And I say this from a vendor side, but it is the truth. Vendors throw solutions at municipalities, IT managers daily, and they're going to nod their heads and smile at me. And it's pressure, right? But you need to understand what you have in environment, what you want to protect, why you're protecting it, as a starting point. So to answer your question, that would be your answer. Know where you are right now, set your baseline, and work from there. Yeah.
I can also just comment on that. Yeah. So it starts with the identification of your risk, then doing like an impact study of the cost of that, and then taking it to your stakeholders, because your stakeholders are ultimately responsible for this decision in your organization. So they need to decide, are we going to accept this risk? Are we going to implement the resolution of that or resolve it, or are we just going to sort of mitigate it through some other kinds of means? So there is those three kind of options. The stakeholders need to say, okay, we agree on this path, we can accept the risk, and this risk is going to lie with someone, and they're going to be responsible for that, or the other remediational efforts that you do.
So I love the ITIL principle of start where you are, know where you are. Because how do you know if you arrived, if you didn't know where you started from and what you wanted to achieve? How is arrival actually determined? So that's really the important bit is sometimes I think we run away with ourselves with wanting to implement smart things. So I don't like the concept of smart cities, because I think it's a people-centric conversation first of what are we trying to achieve, and then the how we're trying to achieve it comes later. And then those layers of accountability come with it.
Thank you. Willem, from your side, how did you start the process of protecting OT devices from a strategic perspective, conversation perspective?
So you're assuming we did that? No, so I think when we talk about accountability, we need to realize that one of the key stakeholders from accountability perspective, I don't think we've really spoke about them, is the service provider themselves of these solutions. So the starting point was when we looked at what we from a high level point of view we wanted to achieve. we realized that before we get to any level, we need to look at the network component of things. How do we protect that? So we looked at quite a few options related to networking. And then we started to look around security on that and things, and how do we protect the information that goes over that network. And thereafter, we drilled down into the lower layers to see what is obviously at that point we had a good understanding of what we wanted to achieve on the roadmap. Before that, we actually started with a roadmap, engaging all departments, understanding the risks, challenges of each department. And I mean from everyone, from infrastructure right through to the local economic development department. So we could find similarities. So once we had that, we started looking at the network layer, with the security around that. And we had this whole epiphany about a whole idea about we're going to use this type of network and this is the best way to secure it. And then you realize as you start to implement, okay, but not necessarily one network or one communication protocol will work for everything. Not that you didn't really think about it beforehand, but when you actually do that practical implementation of things. So we did do a lot of POCs in the beginning. That's why I showed that iterative loop approach that we take, or methodology we took when we implemented solutions. But that was part of the planning phase. The first loop was the planning phase, looking at the risks, what's the possible threats there could be to different types of implementations. Because you need to remember, each implementation can be done in numerous ways. So we had to consider cost. We had to consider the sustainability of implementations and how can things be reused for different types. So we looked at similarities, and each stage of that, we were thinking of this device needs to be protected, this network, this person might access that device. We came to a point where we said, okay, we might not have HMI human machine interface smaller screens at each reservoir because some places people are really there, but they need accessibility on a phone or a tablet or a computer. So how do we protect that, and how do we protect the person? Because remember, phishing attacks and those kind of things, the social engineering side of things, we needed to consider that as well. And that's where the convergence between OT and IT became clear to say, okay, there's two separate worlds, but there is overlapping instances that you need. So you need to look at both worlds when you do this kind of assessment. So that is the kind of approach we took. Obviously, there's a lot more detail to that, but that's how we did it.
Okay, thank you very much for the panel. I'm going to open the floor for questions. Anybody that wants a question, wants to pose a question or make a comment, take discussion further, please raise your hand. Or am I going to nominate somebody to ask a question? Well, I'm going to do something that is rather unconventional. Bongo or Johan Pinar, I see both of you are online. Can you nominate yourself and tell us what you do in your municipality I see Johan just nominated himself, around IT security and OT security. Johan, over to you.
Okay, thank you, David. One of my colleagues sat in the presentation of both Willem and Gavin, and he asked the question, I think it was also discussed, who's ultimately responsible? Because as soon as you start helping other departments, you get a whole package and it belongs to IT. Like you're building a LoRa WAN, who supports the WAN afterwards? Because suddenly at one stage everybody wants it, but as soon as the works needs to start getting, how do you get past that? And security, because we had a security discussion, like Gavin said, keep it behind. My colleague said, keep it as far as away from your network as possible, just to make sure you don't put it yourself in danger. But it's not always possible. But a point always boils down to who's ultimately responsible for this. Because if something goes down, it's easier to point the finger at IT, but you didn't check the WAN, you didn't make sure everything is up and running. As soon as you get into the critical stuff, like Willem said, with water supplies and stuff, is critical to people, and if the reservoir drains down and it's not being notified, then you've got a bigger issue than you can deal with. So that was the question: is how do you deal with that section? Because on our side, we normally, if you start something like this, IT is ultimately responsible for everything, and it's difficult to get it mind shift. Everybody's actually involved in the bigger picture of this. It's not just one person or department, because everybody wants everything to work, but you need to put work into getting everything to work as you want or need.
Okay, thank you, Jan. So what we basically said with is we spoke about the accountability, and we spoke about the risk, and we spoke about ownership. So if we move into the practical space of this now needs to land, how do you facilitate this within an organization so that realization is there that this is not compliance, this is actually an organizational wide risk? Gavin?
It's a pervasive question. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. One, it's going to depend a lot on the culture of the individual organization. There's no one size fits all. Sometimes you're going to lead from below, as we find often in public sector. We're pushing things uphill. If that's the environment you live in, you're going to need to find ways of making work. I think what stands out always is we often don't put enough thought beyond the project management space. So I'm a believer that if you start with the project management principles that are vested in Prince and other methodologies, you will end up in a position where you will assign accountability and ownership up front. And I think that's the key. Is often we're trying to assign accountability and ownership much later in the process, meaning at that point then it's much easier for people to obfuscate themselves from any responsibility. But responsibility is handed down at different layers. Our responsibility from an ICT perspective is protection, governance, oversight, and account, and that's where our accountability lies. It doesn't mean to say that we don't exist at a business level at the same time.
Thank you, Gavin. Aaron, I see Willem's got his hand up. Willem?
Yeah, thanks, David. So I think one of the biggest, well, let me talk out of experience. There's a few challenges with accountability, taking risks, is the turnover of people, or people in general. So whenever we look at the process, we think people, process, technology, and that's the way, and we see the perfect world of how we will implement solutions. And then people resign, or people leave the organization, or whatever the case might be. You might get a new municipal manager or director, or even a manager in the infrastructure department. That can hamper projects, because people come with their preconceived ideas of how things work, or the legacy. They use the legacy systems, and they only want legacy systems, which could be problematic. And then accountability tends sometimes to shift back to the people that initially started the project. So I think Gavin is right in saying if you have a proper detailed project plan and you have it signed off by a proper project sponsor, then you've got a strategic, I'll take it to council if you need to. Then you have got the strategic roadmap that's approved on the highest level to ensure continuity of that project, because people in most instances is a lot of the time the reason why projects do fail, and that can lead to security threats to the organization and financial losses.
Thank you, Willem. And we can also think about the predecessor of a project plan, which is a business case. And if IT writes the business case, IT owns the business case. The business case has to be written or developed by the line function. Gavin?
That frustrates me a lot in this process is, I'm glad you mentioned business case. One of the things I like to look at, and it's difficult often when you're not the strategic leader of the organization, which is MM and council, mayor, and so on, where the return on investment, why are we doing it and what is the benefits? Are we actually perceivably receiving those benefits? And does our business plan clearly outline why we're doing it? It's that value at risk item again. You know, are we doing it because it's the buzzword in the press at the moment, or are we doing it because we want to improve our service delivery and save costs? I've had this argument internally multiple times where we want to put smart meters everywhere. So that's fantastic. What is the strategic purpose for doing it? You know, so everyone knows they want to do it, but they haven't really considered. And that's where external service providers help often, that they can help you guide, you build that business plan, and then determine what the value is for the organization. Because if there's no value, don't do it. It's quite that simple. Because you're going to have to protect it, you're going to have to monitor it, you're going to have to manage it. But if the current systems work and they're cost effective, they can be human centric, and you can still have a smart city.
Thank you, Gavin. Aaron?
I want to add something to that. So this is based on our experiences, right? And I'm going to bring the private sector into this because a lot of the conversations is budget driven, right? We want everything. We want a person responsible for every part of the value chain. But that's theoretically great, but practically it cannot be done sometimes because of budgets. What we have found in the private sector, and you know, we've got customers in the oil and gas, mining, etc. Areas, and there's been this natural change where, because as I mentioned it earlier, when you look at IT, it is protection of data, right? If you look at OT, it is uptime and safety. Now that is a different mindset completely. We use that as the baseline, how you take things forward and how you write your policies, how you do incident responses, how do you do your races, etc. And what they've done is over time is separate these two responsibilities. They've got an IT team and they've got an OT team that looks specifically at these. Some of them have integrated SOCs as such, but still there is a clear divide between the IT and OT, and then from that assign responsibilities within those various disciplines. I just wanted to add that, you know, that is where we see the private sector going currently now. So over time, my view is that would happen in the public sector as well. But because of the way public sector does operate and the business model as such, it may take a little longer, but I do believe it's going to get there as well at some point in time.
Thank you. Peter, I see I've got a question for you. It's from Ashok Naidu. He asks, how do you address OT devices with protocols not covered by your solution? So it's about the diversity of the underlying protocols.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. So we work with our technology vendor very closely, and we're actually one of the global partners. So we take these kind of protocols. So if you have a protocol not covered, we take that, we give them the protocol, we say, okay, this is the vendor that covers that. They actually engage with that vendor to uncover how this protocol works, and then we can do that deep packet inspection. Because with the solution, we actually do deep packet inspection to see what protocols or variables transfer over the network, and then ingest that as part of the data we see. So we actually provide that to the technology vendor, and they work with the partner or the person that actually developed that protocol, or the company, either through us or through yourself, depending on how that relationship works, or they can go directly. So there is that point of it where they do actually evolve it, because this is a global solution for all kind of OT. So there's a lot already covered. A good example for this is they worked with a certain company, Bergen. I don't know if you know Bergen Engines, to actually understand how their engine OT protocols work. They actually envelop those for us.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Ashok, I see you've got your hand up. You can unmute yourself.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good morning, and thank you all for a very informative session. Peter, thanks for that answer. Yeah, I think it's coming to a point where a lot of the older protocols can be addressed nowadays. Thanks for that. It was just a question because you do come across some. My next thing is, and it comes to what Gavin has said earlier about smart cities. There were 23 to 24 smart city areas earmarked for Johannesburg. I worked very closely with one of them, one of the developers on one, did an entire map of the entire landscape down to using crypto. And no cash in an entire environment from taxi ranks to train stations, etc., etc. But not one of them has come to fruition in Gauteng. And that is in the PPP type of environment with government involved. My question is, we talk smart cities all the time. Are there any smart cities? I'm not sure about Cape Town. Cape Town is going smart. I'll give them that. But I'm talking about any of the other, in inverted commas, smart cities that have been earmarked by government, supposedly having funding and done in partnerships with private companies. I'm going to mute my mic and I'll listen. Thanks.
That's a big question, and I don't have the answer for that. Anybody in the panel that's looked into this?
I have a very long-standing dislike for the term smart city, and it's for this precise reason that I think we are selling a dream that, as we've just heard, is often not financially viable. So what Ashok's indicating is, I think the journey that we're on is determining what smart city means to the individual organization, be it public or private sector. I think what it means, I like to use smart applications, smart services, rather than a city is smart. I mean, that's one way to holistically encompass the concept, but I think under the hood, there are smart initiatives, and those initiatives can be quite small, quite granular, and quite impactful. And I think when you identify them through a business case and through analyzing where your business will have the most value rather than the most convenience. And sometimes we're doing smart city for convenience, not for value. And I think that is the tipping point. And the ROE is what really is going to guide us. It's not about how we feel or how convenient we want life to be. It's about what return are we going to have on our investment. I can't spend 50 million to return $1 million. Public sector certainly has a very different sort of span and scope than private sector. We have a finite fixed income, and with that finite fixed income, we've got a very broad scale of services we need to deliver. So you're going to have to pick the ones that are going to either deliver increased revenue or reduce losses. So it's very targeted and specific, in my opinion.
I want to add to that. So, buzzwords is a hell of a thing, and it's a dangerous thing, right? And going with the trends is another thing that can really go pear-shaped for a lot of people who don't understand where they're on their journey and where they want to be. And therefore, smart cities is an overarching word used globally, and you can unpack that and whichever way you want to, whichever way you want to understand it. But in the end, it's basically digitization. It is data gathering, it is sensors, and in the end, the aim is to make the lives of the people better in a municipality, in a city, right? By making informed decisions to make better decisions. And the same thing goes for the word AI. I mean, it is a word that is used by everybody nowadays. AI. We have the solution, and it's AI driven. It's like, okay, I can't swear on the session. But if you look at AI is machine learning and algorithms, which has been around for a very long time. We've just put a commercial buzzword and packaged it into this nice word. And I believe the same thing has been done for smart cities. We mentioned the smart cities, but what is it? And we need to step back and slow down and not be part of the sheep mentality and just follow a few people because they decided as top of the IT food chain that smart cities is where you must be going. You know what? Municipalities had probably started their smart city implementation journey already without them giving it that term. So that is just my view on certain words being used in certain environments. And I think Gavin mentioned this. There's so many acronyms. There's so many things you got to keep up with. And if you're not keeping up with it, you're not a professional in this industry. Let's be clear about that. So just be very mindful of how you adopt these various frameworks within your organization because it's very broad. Know where you want to start and where it is you want to go to. That's what I want to say.
Thank you, Aaron. In my experience, the interaction with municipalities, all of them have some or other digital transformation project running at the moment. And digital evolution means incremental improvement. So when we talk about digital evolution, it's not a big bang approach. Can I have a last comment from the panel members? Peter, can I start with you?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so cybersecurity in operational technology is caring what matters most. This is for your safety and for public safety or for any kind of safety that these environments or operational technology can occur, like people's lives that might be lost to this. So it's not about addressing just financial risk, it's about the safety of your users or of the public that you need to look at in general.
Thank you very much. Aaron, over to you.
Yeah, David, in closing, I think we will just step back and realize that everything we do in this space, technology space, is for the betterment of society and people. And if we keep that in mind, but whatever we do, then I think we're going to win. We're going to get to where we want to be. Whether we call it smart cities, digital migration, smarter cities, as Shoka said, that is the basic principle, bettering the lives of the human beings. And that is kind of all I want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron. Gavin?
Partially stole my thunder there in terms of, I think it's about people. Fundamentally, we look back, we've had cloud. I mean, I remember being an engineer looking after quite a large exchange infrastructure and thinking this thing's going to put me out of business. I'm going to have no job. But it didn't materialize. The fear didn't materialize because the industry needed to grow in another space. It just transferred workloads across from one place to another. So I guess that although I love technology, I'd love to make this about a technology discussion, but I think fundamentally, this is about people. It's about identifying what we're trying to achieve, and so many of my favorite ITIL principles have come out here. My favorite is incremental improvement. You can't change the world overnight. You need to understand where you are, where you want to be, so you can measure how you got there, and then you also need to incrementally improve and be practical about what can be achieved and what value you're going to deliver.
Thank you, Willem.
Yeah, I think to talk OT security, I think the ultimate thing is we need to remember we as municipalities are in the business of service delivery and providing basic services. So I think from a OT security perspective, it's essential that services run firstly safely. It's safe, it's reliable, and it's also we have a responsibility, and so that we do this in a responsible manner when we implement new solutions. It is safe, secure, and responsible. That's from a service delivery perspective.
Thank you very much. From my perspective, thank you for everybody attending. I would just like, my last comment is, while everybody was talking, I had this local economic development view on this, and we cannot separate what we are doing from local economic development, the betterment of the lives of people in our environment, drawing investment to municipalities. So whatever we see, smart systems or smart city or cyber security or IT security or OT security, with whatever lens we look at it, we need to keep in mind that our focus on the Western Cape, in the Western Cape government, is to improve investability of municipalities. And it's based on two fundamental principles: safety and security and reliable service delivery. And what we discussed today links directly to both of them. So thank you very much for attending, everybody. I'm stopping the recording. Can I just ask the panel to stay online? And Gavin?